Welcome to Dream by Design with Melissa Banks, where women share their dreams, struggles, and successes. How they were able to persevere despite the fear and create the life they want and deserve. If you're looking for inspiration to move you past where you normally would stop, then this is the show for you. Here's your host, Melissa Banks.
Welcome to Dream by Design with Melissa Banks. I'm excited you could be with us today. I'm your host, Melissa Banks. Today, we have another amazing woman to share her journey with us and how she was able to keep going despite the circumstances. Today, our guest is Dr. Teresa Smith, a.k.a. Dr. Todd. Thank you for joining us today.
Hi, Melissa. How are you doing?
I'm just wonderful. I'm excited for this conversation. How are you today?
I am fabulous.
And let's just get right into your story a little bit. I was looking at your journey, Dr. Todd, and you have a background in education, and you've been in education for over 20 years, and you've had a lot of success in that area. But what got my attention was your role as CEO of DQ Consulting, where you help individuals and organizations reach their goals regardless of what their circumstances are. How did your background in education prepare you for that position, and how are you able to do that for people and organizations?
Yeah, thank you, Melissa, for that question. It's really a unique question, and immediately I think about my fourth grade teacher. My fourth grade teacher, her name was Mrs. Flowers, and she was the type of teacher who knew that all students could learn. And so in those days, like it was a long time ago, but in those days, or at least for her class, she would have class secretary, treasurer, and it wasn't like formalized like, the person that's the president of the school or those sorts of things, but in the class. And I was the secretary/treasurer. And what I had to do when we were going to have a party, I would write down every student's name, and then I would write down the money that they contributed. And so, we were paying 25 cents or 50 cents. And so I didn't know at the time, but she really was instilling order, protocol, organization, the ability to understand where people were, because there were some people who weren't able to pay the amount that we were supposed to pay. So when you fast forward all these many years later, when I walked into education, I walked in with a background in politics, meaning that I had been my state president for the college and youth chapters in NAACP. So I'd had an opportunity to sit at the table with some of the world leaders as they negotiated. Well, that was another skill set. So when I walked into education, I viewed the world differently. And I think that is what made me effective as far as working with individuals who are trying to master or trying to understand how their goals can actually come true. And so I used the work that I did as a school counselor in the building, working with children who are at risk, and then going from that setting to working at the premier high school in the state at that time. So it was like apples and oranges. But at the same time, I learned that all students and parents or caregivers, regardless of what their SES was or their zip code, all of them wanted the same thing. They each wanted to succeed. And so it was about expectation and how I could make their expectation a reality. And that's what I do with the individuals that I coach, organizations that I work with. We develop a plan of action. Once I've got their goal, I've got their vision, I've got their goal, and then we look at it and we do small steps. Because what I found is when you've got this big dream, we sometimes forget that it takes incremental steps to achieve it, and you get sometimes disappointed when it doesn't happen overnight. So I tell them, what is it, the phrase, in order to eat an elephant, it's one bite at a time. Let's make small goals, because as you achieve those goals, your momentum increases, plus their self-esteem and their confidence increases. So I bring all of that to the work that I did as an educator in the K-12 system, and even the work that I do now at the college level, because I am managing part-time adjunct faculty. So I am always their cheerleader, just as I am with the clients and that I work with with GQ Consulting.
You know, I heard so much in what you just said, but one of the things that jumps out to me is, you know, we might be in one place in our life and we're thinking that it's just about where we are right now, but it takes each one of those pieces to get you to your destiny. So you were in one place learning to take money for a class, but it was all setting you up for the different skills that you would need in order to pursue some of your dreams and goals later on. So it takes all of those pieces. So I tell people all the time, don't just look at where you are right now, because that's just a piece of the journey. And that's what I heard from you as you were talking about the different places that you got different skill sets. And when you got into education, you brought all of that in. And all of that led to what you are doing now. Another thing I heard you talk about is a plan of action. That's a piece many of us miss. So we get this big dream and we say, this is what I want to do, and it's big, and we don't take the steps and have the plan to get there, and then we get overwhelmed because we didn't get there quick enough. So that was very, very helpful to me, the way you laid out your story. So I know that you were author of several books. I wasn't aware of that before I was prepared. How many, though, as I was preparing for this episode. But one of the things that stood out for me was your book, Stronger, How Overcoming Life's Adversities Can Push You Into Your Purpose, was number 2 on Oprah's Books to Read in 20 Books to Read in 2019. Congratulations for that. That is really an accomplishment. So how does it feel to see your hard work come together in that book and then to be recognized in that manner?
You know, Melissa, it was really humbling because it is so much work that goes into writing. And for that book, I had been writing this book most of my life. I had envisioned it many different ways. And so to actually finish this book finally, and then to receive the recognition that it should be number 2, as you said, of the books that Oprah should be reading in 2019, it was sort of surreal. You know, it's a goal, and it's like when it finally comes, sometimes you're not prepared for it. And, you know, I've gotten lots of great feedback, but still it's surreal because it's my journey. And because it's my journey, sometimes I'm very protective of it. And I've had to learn that you've been writing this journey most of your life. Now you've written it. Now you have to let it go and share it with other people because you wrote it to help other people. And so for me, it's humbling. And I'll be a little honest. It's a bit daunting because it requires me to step out of my space and to step into the reader space, if that makes any sense, and recognize that it can help people, and that's what I want to do, but I have to remove Teresa from that whole equation. But the recognition, the feedback that I've gotten on the book, it's humbling. I'm excited, but it's still humbling because I just really can't believe that I did it.
Wow.
After so many years of working at it.
That just shows all that work that you put in, and if you stick with it and stay focused on your dream and keep making those steps, it will be more than you expect. So congratulations again for that. If you're just joining us, you're listening to Dream by Design with Melissa Banks, and today our guest is Dr. Teresa Smith, a.k.a. Dr. Taz, author, motivational speaker, coach, entrepreneur, grant writer, and web series host. A busy, busy woman. Tell me, though, Dr. Todd, when did you know you wanted to empower others through writing?
Melissa, really, let's just say I was 10. I'll make myself 10. I used to say to my mother, I'm going to write a book about motivation. And maybe I haven't really written that book yet. Maybe it's my new book that's coming out, hopefully in the next 6 weeks. Maybe that's the book. And the reason why we would have this dialogue about it, because I was always an observer of people, adults as well as, children my own age, and just, looking at their behavior and And sometimes I realized they were doing things they didn't mean to be mean sometimes. They were doing it out of, I'm going to say, their insecurity, or they didn't know another way to manage whatever situation it was. And so I would always chalk it up to low self-esteem, because that was the only way that I could define it. And so I was always thinking about, okay, I want to write about low self-esteem and motivation, whether it's external motivation or intrinsic motivation. And so I really have been wanting to help people basically all my life. And I'll tell you, I've met many people, many places, and it's very rare that I walk into a place and if I engage in a conversation that I don't find myself helping someone. And it's not that I go there to do that. It just sort of happens. And that's the way it was for me as a child also. My classmates, things were happening to them. They would come and they would tell me things. I didn't share it. I didn't know I was in quote-unquote training to be a counselor or a coach at that time, because I just knew you didn't share stuff that people told you. But really, all my life, I knew that I wanted to help other people, because I didn't want people to hurt. And that's a simple way of saying it, because that's the way I guess I thought about it as a child. But I wanted the best for people, because I guess I wanted the best for me. And so by me wanting that for myself, I thought it was possible for everybody, knowing that it would be different for different people. And so as I was trying to be the best person I could, given the situations that I was dealing with, I wanted everybody else to be the best person. And so, like I said, basically, ever since I was probably 10 or 11, I've known that I wanted to help other people.
Wow, that's really wonderful, and a wonderful story to share, that it was planted in you in that young age. I tell a story all the time about how I started to become an entrepreneur, even though I didn't know that was even possible. So it seemed, but I was an adult when I even recognized that. But when I look back, it was already there. It was in my spirit. It was the need to motivate people was always there. I had a passion for it. I could be in the bathroom and start up a conversation, and it could end with someone crying on my shoulder that I didn't even know. So all of that was planted there, but I really didn't know it. I didn't recognize it. And for you to recognize it, that says a lot. Now, Dr. Cox, I was looking at your social media, and it's so inspirational. Like every post is motivating you to be more, to do more, or to see more of yourself, and it's really encouraging to grow your social media. So how important do you feel social media presence is to an entrepreneur right now?
I was meeting with someone earlier, and they mentioned MySpace to me. And, MySpace has been a couple of years back now. And I think that, yes, it was. But I was glad the person mentioned that, because basically at that point we were talking about the significance of social media. Social media, and it's taken me a moment social media is the old commercials on regular television. We still got the commercials, and we know we're going to have the Super Bowl commercials. But it's different. Social media is still those commercials. Social media now is the advertisement that you saw in magazines, that you saw in newspapers. And the difference is you have individuals who are touting that. It's not just the businesses that are doing it. And so when you've got individuals who, in essence, have more credibility, at least with their followers, than perhaps the business does, it helps you to understand just how important social media is. And we can see it because I've seen, folks go on and they'll say something not so pleasing about a business, and then the next thing you know, it's like people start boycotting that particular business, because of the service that they received or the lack of services that they receive for whatever reason. So when you talk about social media now, it is so important. I remember, and I'm awful with dates, but I'm going to say probably 7 years ago now, maybe 5 to 7 years ago, when Twitter was really beginning. And I remember on the news they were talking about the politicians using Twitter. Everybody uses Twitter. And, our immediate past president, he really used Twitter, and we know how powerful social media is. So for an entrepreneur, if you're trying to get your business out there in front of the masses, you have to become comfortable using social media. I mean, you just have to, in order to reach the individuals that actually are paying the dollars. You've got to become comfortable using it.
Absolutely. I absolutely agree with you on that. So I have to ask you about COVID-19 and 2020. How was it for you and your business? And did you have some challenges? Were you able to overcome those challenges? And share with us a little bit about how you were able to make any necessary changes that was necessary.
Well, COVID-19 in 2020, it was an interesting time. For me, I had begun to use the word reckoning, first of all, before it became squash. Now you hear it everywhere. And I just felt that something was about to change within the country. Well, I never thought that we'd have a pandemic. And so just as other people had to pivot, for me, I had done some interviews, on-ground interviews in Charlotte for my Todd's Live. And I was planning to start, airing those because the person whose event I was at, they were planning to start taping a short film in like March of April of last year. And then COVID hit. And so everything sort of turned on its head. And so I still have the footage. I'm like, okay, just keep the footage. You'll do something else with it. There was an increase in individuals who wanted coaching sessions. And I'll have to be honest, I just didn't have the bandwidth to accommodate everyone. So that meant I had to figure out how I was going to restructure that part of my business so that I could meet the need. Because before, people weren't necessarily as open to virtual sessions, whereas now, Zoom is just like second nature because we use it for everything. Yeah. And so, I pivoted with that. But what I found myself doing as I was pivoting, because, I talked about having a plan and, the organizational skills and all the things that I learned through the different places that I've worked and people I've known, I started writing. And so I wrote a short story for children that will be coming out later this year. I started finalizing a book that should hopefully be out in about 6 weeks, Transformation, that I had been working on. And I think transformation was very cathartic for me, and I hope it will be for readers, because I had to examine who I was and where I wanted to go and who I wanted to be. And so as I wrote the book and refined it, as COVID really began to close in on us, it became this is going to sound very odd, but it became like a lifeline. It kept me in a good place emotionally because I was constantly evaluating where I was because I was constantly writing about that. And I think for me, the whole particular with that book is that individuals will look at it as personal development and take it and understanding that personal development in any area, it's a repetitive process. As I say in the book, you can do the same questions over and over again, and every time you do that, you're going to come up with a different answer. And that's what you want because you're constantly growing. So for me to come out of COVID-19, about to publish 2 books, and writing some other ones, and I'm working on my my new show, Transform with Taz. It's a combination cooking show, and as someone said to me, it's Talk with Taz. And so it's Talk with Taz in my kitchen, but I filmed all the cooking show segments last year. So, even though COVID was happening, I was learning to pivot because, again, it's part of the journey. This particular time, it was COVID. We could name times that we've had to pivot many different things. But it's just about learning to pivot. I often tell someone, I'm going to let you waddle, and this is for myself too, I'm going to let you waddle for about an hour or so. But after then, you have to step up and keep moving. Because if you waddle too long, you can't get out of it. And, it's very easy to spiral when you're in isolation, like a lot of people were during the height of the pandemic.
You're absolutely right. One of the things you said, and you said this may sound funny, you said it was a lifeline. To me, I feel that way because I was able to tap into some areas that I don't believe under other circumstances I would have done that. I know that sometimes we just work our businesses and we work in our lives and we're constantly moving and we're not stopping and we're not looking at ourselves. And another thing you said is who you were and who you wanted to be. It caused you to stop and look at yourself. And then I had to look at some things I was doing and spending all this time doing that I really didn't enjoy doing. It wasn't paying off for me. So it was a lifeline, if you will. And I haven't heard that phrase put there, but I absolutely understood what you said, what you meant when you said that. Mm-hmm. So thank you for that. And it's also about being willing to change. You were willing to do some things that you weren't already doing, and so that was important. And it was also important to take advantage of the time. So I have this time, what can I do? And that led you to the books that you have and the books that you have coming and your show and all of those things. And maybe if that situation wasn't there, you may not have even went into that direction. So I definitely appreciate of what you just said. Now, Dr. Todd, you motivate, you inspire, you encourage, you help people to look at themselves and come up with plans to make themselves better. So when you get into that moment where life is hitting you, and I tell people all the time, I love being an entrepreneur, but an entrepreneur is hard, and you have a lot of stuff coming at you sometimes. What do you do when you need some encouragement and some uplifting for yourself?
I do several things. One thing I do is I like to exercise. So whether it's lifting a little weights or walking or getting on a piece of exercise equipment, I do that because it gets the endorphins flowing. And I've learned over time it really does work. In addition, there are people that I reach out to who I can truly be myself with. I think the one thing, I think exercise is important. We need to sleep, we need to eat correct, but you need at least 2 or 3 people who you can truly be yourself with, meaning it's a no judgment zone, because when you're in our industry, sometimes individuals, they get a little uncomfortable when they realize that you're a human being. They know it, but when you're in need, they don't know how to manage that because they see you as always upbeat. But because we are human beings, we all have highs and lows. And so I've got a group of friends that I can reach out to that I've known for years, and they take me for how I am. I don't have to sugarcoat, how I say things. I just say it. And they understand that's the space that I'm in. They let me say it. And then, in a few minutes, I'm back to my other self. Because even I have to have an opportunity to express my feelings, my disappointment. Some people may say to vent. I have to have that. But also, what I've found as a spiritual person is that God will send people to me who were never part of that space, who've become part of that space, because they have a way of saying things to me that I get it. And the funny thing is with my new show, I am really enjoying the conversations in the kitchen because with each person that I sit down and have a conversation with, I lead with something. They give me something that I needed. And sometimes I didn't know that I needed, but they'll say it, and it's be like, oh. And what I find myself is, it's just, we really are in my kitchen. I'm just as excited as if these individuals are actually literally in the kitchen with me because it's an exchange, and I get joy out of it. So what I try to do is, in essence, to make sure I'm surrounding myself with like-minded people. We've all heard the phrase, iron sharpens iron. That doesn't mean that the iron doesn't have a moment sometimes, but I've learned that you really should be careful. One person says you have to be careful about what you assimilate when you're around certain people. My mother would say it a different way. But the bottom line is you have to guard your emotions. And in order to do that, you have to be perceptive and be willing to make hard decisions, because sometimes you have to remove yourself from spaces or from individuals that don't add to you when you are in need. If you're always having to give out and you're never able to receive, then, that's one of those times I'd say it's a red flag. And it's a flashing light. It's a caution light. Pretty soon it's going to be a red light. Right. And you need to examine that. But those are some of the things that I do to make sure that I'm good.
Thank you for that. That was a lot of great information. And because, strong people and people, the encourager, I tell people sometimes the encourager need encouraging. So those are great ways to do that. This has been an amazing conversation, and thank you again for being here today. Do you have any final words you want to give to our audience? And be sure to let them know how to stay connected with you.
Melissa, first of all, thank you again for inviting me to spend this time with you and your audience. The one thing I think that I would leave the audience is that hard work and perseverance does pay off. Also, as I just stated, be careful with who you associate yourself with. If you're associating yourself with individuals who are not headed in the same direction that you are, you might want to examine whether or not that's the group you need to be with. Also, I would just say, understand it doesn't happen overnight. But, Melissa, you yourself are an excellent example of it. We could name plenty of people that folks know who are an excellent example of putting the work in and being consistent about it, being open to advice, and then ciphering through it, and then taking the nuggets that work for you and then start applying them. So those are the nuggets that I would leave to the audience. They can find me. I am on Facebook, Talk with Taz. They can also find me on YouTube, Dr. Taz, that's DRTAS. I'm also on Twitter, Ask Dr. Taz 1. They can find me there. And I'm also on Instagram, Dr. Teresa A. Smith. And then my website is AskDrTaz.com.
Well, thank you again, Dr. Taz, for being with us today. And thank you to our guests for being here today. And thank you to our guests for tuning in to today's edition of Dream by Design. I'm your host, Melissa Banks, saying all your dreams are possible. Believe in yourself, work hard, and don't quit. Until next time, thank you for choosing Dream by Design with Melissa Banks.